I only needed somewhere to sleep. But then I heard something hollow inside those old Bellows.
No apartment, no paycheck, no family room left open to her, just a canvas tool roll and $3 she had saved from her uncle's workbench. And with that $3, she bought a harmonium reed studio standing forgotten outside Brattleboro, Windham County, Vermont. Since 1978, the north roof had opened to rain. Half the Bellows leather had rotted away. The county condemned the loft in October 2022 and marked it for demolition the following spring. But inside, the master tuning Bellows was a sealed wooden chamber no inspector had opened in decades, holding something that would alter the measure of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Penny Hale had been listening her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Bellows Falls, she learned rooms by sound. Sleet on kitchen glass, a refrigerator motor stopping at midnight, her father's boots beside the door. She was not much of a singer, but she could hear when a hinge dragged, or one church note sat a little sharp. Her father, Daniel, repaired school boilers and carried the same green lunchbox for 19 years. On Sundays, he sharpened pencils over the sink and said most things failed slowly before they failed all at once. Her uncle Walter Hale taught her what to do with that listening. Every other Saturday from age 11, Penny sat beside him at a scarred maple bench in Springfield, where he restored pump organs and harmoniums. Walter showed her how to file a brass-free reed near the tip to raise pitch, nearer the base to lower it, checking each change under steady air. For cracked bellows, he cut goatskin gussets, brushed on warm hide glue, and pressed the seams overnight. Penny labeled screws, warmed glue water, and listened. Kitsch is not force, Walter told her. It is patience made audible. At 13, she understood only the rule beneath it. Remove too much brass, and it could not be returned. Pull old leather too hard, and the repair became another wound. Walter died during a February ice storm when Penny was 19. By the time she reached his shop, the landlord had cleared it. His files, reed blocks, tuning cones, knives, and notebooks had vanished into auction boxes. Beneath the stairs she found only his canvas tool roll, one broken file inside, and brass dust caught in a fold. 6 years later, she kept accounts for Merritt Furnishings in Keene, New Hampshire. Calvin Merritt spoke so softly, employees leaned toward him. He corrected mistakes by sliding papers back with one finger. When orders slowed, paydays moved from Friday to Monday, then Wednesday, then nowhere. Penny kept recording invoices while 3 months of wages accumulated beside her name. The bankruptcy notice appeared on a gray Tuesday in March. Merritt's chair and 2 filing cabinets were already gone. A sheet taped inside the glass door said, "Unpaid wages," would enter proceedings. Penny later heard he had shifted money into personal accounts, but by then the difference between theft and paperwork did not buy supper. Her landlord came on April 7th. Penny found her blue enamel saucepan on the hallway floor. Her mother stood behind the landlord, both hands around her purse strap. 2 nights earlier, Penny had asked to sleep on her parents' sofa for 1 month. Her mother had promised to speak to Daniel. Now she looked at the saucepan. "You need to be gone by Friday morning." Penny folded 2 shirts into Walter's canvas roll. Her suitcase zipper had broken. The landlord watched from the door. Her mother lifted her eyes once, then lowered them. She did not argue. She did not offer the sofa. Penny carried the saucepan downstairs and left it on the curb. For 6 weeks she followed the Connecticut River with less money each day. She slept 4 nights in the Keene bus station, then paid $18 for a church basement bunk in Charlestown. In Claremont, she spent 2 nights in a laundromat chair under the blue light of a vending machine. In Springfield, she slept behind a friend's pottery shed until rain dampened Walter's roll. She spent $42.60 on food the first week, $27,010 the second, then lived mostly on apples, crackers, and peanut butter. By the fifth week, she had $9.14. She protected $3 of it. The bills had been tucked in Walter's roll after his funeral, behind the broken file, inside a sleeve marked bus fare. She had never spent them. Hunger had reduced many things in her life, but not that. On the 41st day, rain drove her into Brooks Memorial Library in Brattleboro. She sat near a radiator and opened the local weekly. Between a hay notice and a winter-damaged canoe was a county disposal listing, abandoned commercial structure, former harmonium reed and tuning studio, Windham County tax acquisition, nominal transfer, $3. Buyer assumes all repairs. Penny read it twice, then asked the reference librarian for a road atlas. The property lay north of town, beyond the last regular bus stop. The county wanted a signed transfer before demolition contracts were issued. By closing time, she had circled the road in pencil. The bus fare would take nearly everything except Walter's 3 bills. Walking would cost less and hurt more. She folded the classified into the canvas roll beside the broken file. The next morning, Penny Hale started north toward a building everyone else had already decided was finished. The northbound bus left Brattleboro before 7, carrying Penny as far as Putney Road before the driver folded his route sheet and told her the county spur was beyond service. She walked the rest. The first miles were easy enough, past wet fields and barns still holding the gray of morning. By noon, the straps of Walter's canvas roll had rubbed through her coat lining. She stopped beside a stone wall to eat half an apple and measured the distance remaining against what the librarian had penciled on the map. 11 miles if she stayed on the road, less if she trusted farm tracks. Penny stayed on the road. That night she slept in an unused hay barn with permission from a farmer named Mr. Pease, who found her standing under the eaves while sleet darkened her shoulders. The thermometer nailed beside his milkroom door read 29 degrees Fahrenheit. He gave her 2 wool horse blankets without asking where she was headed. "Keep off the lower boards," he said. "They sweat." She slept above the stalls with dry hay under her spine and woke twice to mice moving in the rafters. By late morning, the road dropped toward Brattleboro's older commercial streets. Penny passed Sam's Outdoor Outfitters, the Harmony Lot parking entrance, a narrow storefront belonging to Vermont Artisan Designs, the brick frontage of the Latches Theater, and Amy's Bakery Arts Cafe where the smell of coffee followed her half a block before the wind carried it away. She did not go inside. At the Windham County offices, she wiped her shoes carefully on the mat and asked about the $3 property. The clerk behind the counter wore silver spectacles on a chain and had a thumb permanently darkened with blue stamp ink. Her brass nameplate read, Mrs. Eleanor Voss, Land Records. Mrs. Voss looked at Penny, then at the canvas roll. "You understand the roof is open?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand there is no certified electrical service?" "Yes, ma'am." "The well hasn't passed inspection in years?" "Yes, ma'am." "And the demolition order becomes active in May?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Voss removed her spectacles. "Do you have $3? Penny opened Walter's roll. The bills had softened along the folds over 6 years. She laid them flat on the counter, smoothing each one with the side of her hand. Mrs. Voss watched it without comment, then drew the transfer papers from a brown municipal folder. The deed contained language Penny had to read twice. The county made no warranty regarding habitability, water, structural stability, contents, boundaries beyond recorded survey, or the continued existence of the north wall. Penny signed where Mrs. Voss pointed. The clerk pressed a heavy brass recording stamp against the paper. its mechanism struck with a clean, mechanical clap. Route 30 north, Mrs. Voss said. Take the old West River Road turn, then the unpaved spur after the red dairy barn. When you see two black walnuts together, the lane is on your left. Don't trust the first gate. That belongs to Mercer. Penny folded her copy of the deed. Mrs. Voss had already turned toward a filing cabinet when she stopped. Hale. Penny looked up. The clerk repeated that name more slowly. Walter Hale? My uncle. Mrs. Voss rested one hand on the open drawer. For several seconds she seemed to be deciding whether something belonged to county business or to memory. He worked on the Esty instruments. Penny said nothing. Not at the factory, not properly. Repair work, church instruments, reads sometimes. Mrs. Voss pushed the drawer closed. My father brought him a chapel organ in 1996. One note had been dead since Kennedy was president. Your uncle sat in our dining room for 4 hours and made it speak again. A small movement passed across Penny's face. Mrs. Voss noticed he would not take what my father offered him, charged $20 and a jar of pickles. That sounds like him. The clerk looked at the deed again. That studio supplied reeds and repair stock to shops around this county long after the larger factories declined. My father called it the Little Reed House. I thought it had been empty longer than you've been alive. It has. Mrs. Voss reached under the counter and returned Penny's $3 bills. Penny did not take them. The transfer says $3. It does. Then the county needs $3. The two women stood with the bills between them. At last, Mrs. Voss opened the top drawer of her desk, placed the money inside, and closed it carefully. Then that is where they will stay. Penny walked out carrying a deed whose paper weighed less than Walter's broken file. The afternoon had brightened, though the wind along Route 30 came cold from the West River. She followed Mrs. Voss's directions past scattered houses and fields, still flattened from winter. An elderly man, repairing a mailbox, lifted 2 fingers without stopping his hammer. A brindled dog came down a driveway barking until Penny spoke to it, after which it followed her for nearly a quarter mile before losing interest. The walnut trees appeared near 4 o'clock. They stood close together beside a leaning stone wall, black branches crossing overhead. Beyond them, a lane almost disappeared beneath last year's grass. At its end was the studio. It was larger than Penny had imagined and smaller than the word factory suggested. Perhaps 38 feet long and 24 across, 2 stories at the front with a lower workroom addition behind. Weathered pine clapboards had silvered almost to the color of ash. The foundation was rough fieldstone. A brick chimney leaned slightly east. A section of cedar shingle roofing over the north side had collapsed inward. Over the door hung a wooden sign. Most of the paint had disappeared, but Penny could still make out the words, Hale and Bowen Harmonium Reeds, Voicing and Repair. She stopped. The first name was not proof of anything. Hale was not rare enough for proof. Still, she placed her hand against the gate before opening it. The hinges resisted, then gave with a low complaint. Inside the front room, cold air carried the smell of mouse droppings, old pine, and something metallic beneath both. Dust softened the floorboards, except for a narrow path made by rain entering through the broken roof. Penny touched the wall and felt damp plaster powder against her fingertips. Her boot disturbed a loose brass reed lying near the baseboard. It answered with the smallest, dry note. Penny crouched. The reed was greened along one edge, but otherwise intact, a thin tongue of brass riveted into its frame. She lifted it by the block and blew gently through the opening. Nothing happened. Too little pressure. Walter would have used the bench bellows. She put the reed in her pocket. The front room had once been an office and packing space. A sloped desk stood beneath the east window. The drawers were empty except for curled invoice paper and one steel nib. When Penny opened the rear door, the smell changed. Leather. Old leather had its own sweetness when dry, and a darker animal smell where damp had reached it. The workroom held both. Long voicing benches ran beneath the windows. Reed trays filled shallow cabinets along one wall. Several foot bellows frames lay stacked in a corner, their skins cracked into black scales. And at the center stood the tuning table. Its master bellows occupied nearly half the structure, enclosed in thick wooden casing beneath a broad work surface. The reservoir was large enough to supply steady pressure for reeds tested one after another, perhaps whole sets together. A weighted board rested above it on iron guides. Penny laid her palm on the casing. Dust, then walnut. Someone had built it well. She found the pump lever at the side and pulled. Nothing moved. She leaned harder. Somewhere inside, dried leather gave a papery sigh, followed by a faint movement of air across the table. It smelled of cedar and dust. For 1 second, Penny was 11 again, standing beside Walter while he tested a church reed chest, watching his fingers hover before touching anything. She released the lever. Present again. By sunset, she had explored enough to know that one corner of the front room remained dry. She swept it with an old corn broom found behind the stove, shook out one horse blanket, and laid the other beneath it. The building had no working lights. She ate the second half of the apple beside the window, while the last color faded behind the walnut trees. Cold entered quickly. Penny kept her coat on and placed Walter's canvas roll beneath her head. Every unfamiliar sound enlarged itself in darkness. A board settling upstairs, claws moving somewhere inside the wall, wind touching a loose strip of flashing. Once, the tuning bellows gave a low wooden knock as the temperature changed. She opened her eyes. Nothing followed. Outside, the dog she had passed earlier barked once far down the road. Penny turned toward the black shape of the workroom doorway. The county had called the studio abandoned, but abandoned was a word used by people standing outside. True harmony is created when we quietly support those who have lost their voice. For the first 3 days, Penny learned the property by necessity. The well stood 20 yards behind the studio beneath a crooked wooden cover. She lowered a galvanized bucket until the rope slackened, then hauled up water that smelled faintly of iron but ran clear after settling. The outhouse leaned toward a stand of sumac and needed one hinge reset before the door would close. Indoors, she began memorizing the floor by sound. A high complaint beside the office desk, 2 hollow boards near the stair, and one deep creak before the workroom threshold that always sounded like someone stepping behind her. On the 4th morning, she walked back toward town carrying a list. The hardware store belonged to Amos Pike, a narrow man with white eyebrows that extended beyond the rims of his glasses. His left index finger ended at the first joint. He used the shortened finger to hold receipts against the counter while writing totals with his other hand. The store smelled of rope, kerosene residue, pine handles, and fertilizer dust. Penny set her list down. Amos read it, without asking why she needed chimney rods, leather needles, stove cement, lamp oil, and coarse steel wool all at once. You bought the reed place? Yes. He looked over his spectacles. Thought so. Her remaining money would not cover everything. She removed the leather needles first. Amos put them back. Then she removed the lamp oil. He returned that too. I cannot buy on credit. You can now. I do not know when I can pay. Neither do I. He opened a ledger beneath the counter and wrote, Penny Hale, across a fresh line. Pay something when something comes in. From a shelf behind him, he added a stained paperback titled, Home Repair for Old Houses. No charge. Previous owner argued with every chapter. Penny carried home only what she could manage. A wire chimney brush cost $6.75, 6 feet of fiberglass rod $4.20, stove cement $3.10, a pound of cut nails $2.85, and lamp oil $1.60. Amos tied the rods to the outside of Walter's canvas roll. with butcher's cord. The chimney came first. Penny read the fireplace chapter that evening, then climbed onto the roof the next morning after tying a rope around the soundest chimney course and looping the other end around her waist. She removed the sheet metal cap, lowered the brush, and worked it down one rod at a time. At 6 feet, it stopped. She twisted clockwise. Nothing. She raised it 3 inches and drove it down again. A hard, black crust broke loose inside the flue. Creosote fell through the fireplace below with the sound of gravel poured into a bucket. For 4 hours she alternated pushing, twisting, withdrawing, and adding rod sections. The chimney had accumulated glossy deposits where damp wood must once have burned too cool. She scraped until the brush passed from crown to smoke chamber without catching. Then she went inside, shoveled the fallen creosote into a metal pan, checked the firebox for loose brick, and sealed 2 narrow mortar gaps with stove cement. The work took 7 hours altogether. Her palms blistered through the borrowed gloves. That evening she built a fire no larger than both her hands. First dry maple twigs, then split kindling, then 1 wrist-thick piece of hardwood. She watched the smoke. It rose. No spill beneath the lintel. No gray ribbon curling back into the room. Penny added another piece. An hour later, she heated well water in the blue enamel saucepan she had retrieved from the curb before leaving Keene. She boiled noodles with half an onion and ate sitting on the floor, the bowl balanced on Walter's closed tool roll. Steam touched her face. It was the first hot meal she had cooked for herself in nearly 7 weeks. The workroom waited until the next day. Penny opened the shutters and began from the east wall, not searching for treasure, only making an inventory before moisture or rust destroyed anything else. There were 12 shallow reed drawers, most still labeled by pitch and faded pencil. A hand-cranked grinding wheel stood near the north window, its stone worn hollow at the center. She found a voicing file no longer than her little finger, 3 tuning cones, a brass reed scraper, 2 wooden reed blocks drilled with grated slots, a leatherworker's head knife with the edge protected in cork, and a box of goatskin pieces hardened almost beyond use. The master tuning table occupied the center. Its bellows casing was built from black walnut boards nearly an inch thick, dovetailed at the corners and fastened without visible modern screws. A foot lever connected by iron linkage to an internal feeder. Above that, the weighted reservoir should have risen and fallen under steady pressure. Penny tried their lever again. The feeder skin leaked badly, but not everywhere. One section still held enough air to lift the reservoir perhaps half an inch. Then it settled. She pumped twice more. A low tone came from beneath the table. Not a reed. Wood. Penny stopped. She pressed her knuckles against the left side of the casing. Solid. She moved 6 inches and knocked again. Solid. At the rear, near the lower corner, the sound changed. Hollow. She repeated the test from above and along both sides, marking each spot lightly with chalk. One rectangular area returned the same shallow resonance, about 14 inches wide and perhaps 10 high. The panel looked continuous. No hinge, no handle, no obvious seam beneath the grime. Penny fetched a narrow scale from the bench and measured the casing from both exterior faces. The outside dimensions did not agree with the interior space visible through the feeder opening. There were almost 3 inches missing. Walter had taught her to distrust missing inches. She crouched and ran her fingertips along the grain. Near the lower edge, she felt a circle no larger than a quarter. Not metal. Wood. She cleaned it with the corner of her shirt. A cedar disc had been set flush into the walnut. Penny stared at it for several seconds before touching it again. The cedar had dried lighter than the surrounding wood. She slipped the tip of Walter's broken file into the edge and turned gently. The disc moved. Behind it, was a recessed brass screw. She found 2 more cedar plugs under the table, each concealing the same kind of fastener. Penny removed them slowly. The false panel did not fall away. It remained tight against a narrow rabbet. She worked the head knife carefully into the seam, then stopped, unwilling to damage the walnut. A thinner reed scraper opened it with less force. The panel shifted outward. Cold cedar-scented air escaped from behind it. Inside lay packages wrapped in waxed cloth. Penny sat back on her heels. She did not reach in immediately. She went to the stove, washed her hands, dried them on her coat lining, and returned with the lamp. The first bundle contained tools, not general tools. Reed tools, 2 Swiss pattern files, a small burnisher, a steel scraper, reed-setting pliers, and a brass gauge engraved in thousandths of an inch. They had been oiled before wrapping. The waxed cloth had kept rust to a faint shadow at the joints. A second packet held brass reeds arranged by size between strips of felt. Penny lifted one toward the lamp. The tongue was bright. Someone had filed it with such restraint that the scrape marks were barely visible. She placed it back. Behind the reed packet was a square tin box. It was heavier than its size suggested. Penny set it on the tuning table and opened the lid. Paper first, folded currency, old but dry. Beneath it, envelopes of coins. She closed the box, then opened it again. Procedure mattered. She spread 1 clean cloth across the bench and counted everything once from left to right, then again from right to left. There were modern bills mixed with older notes, all stored flat. The coins had been separated into paper envelopes, marked only by denomination. Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty half dollars, Mercury dimes, and Indian head cents. Some were worn nearly smooth. Others retained sharp lettering. At the bottom lay a small military medal, darkened by age. Penny lifted it by the ribbon. The inscription carried a name she did not recognize, and the year 1918 she set it apart. The money took nearly 2 hours to count. The total was $36,700, not 36,000, approximately. Not a round amount chosen for hiding. $36,700 exactly. Penny counted a third time. The number remained. Only after she had replaced the bills and coins in order did she notice a leather-bound diary pressed against the back of the compartment. Its cover had softened at the corners from handling long before it was sealed away. Beneath the diary lay an envelope. Penny did not appear on it. No name did. Only 4 words in careful ink. For the one who listens. She held the envelope under the lamp. The handwriting tightened something in her chest. Not because she recognized it yet, because she almost did. Penny carried the diary and envelope to the front room, but she did not open either. Instead, she locked the tin box back inside the Bellows compartment, replaced the walnut panel without tightening the screws, put on her coat, and walked through the rear door. The evening had cleared. Beyond the walnut trees, runoff from the hills moved hard through the narrow creek, brown water catching fragments of late light. Penny sat on a cold stone beside it, with the unopened envelope in both hands. For weeks, every dollar had meant distance to the next meal, the next dry chair, the next place where no one asked her to move. Now, $36,700 waited inside a broken tuning table. She watched the current until there was no light left on the water. Then she went back inside without breaking the seal. True harmony is created when we quietly support those who have lost their voice. Morning came pale through the east windows. Penny set the envelope on the tuning bench and turned it until the handwriting caught the light. The long downward stroke in the L, the narrow loop in the G, the habit of leaving too much space before a final word. She had seen those shapes on masking tape labels in Walter's shop, on Christmas cards, on the folded instructions he once tucked into her coat pocket. She broke the seal with the reed scraper. Inside were 6 pages. My dear one, whoever you are, if you are reading this, then you have already found what I could not carry away and what I did not trust anyone else to distribute. I hope you opened the Bellows carefully. If you did not, perhaps that is a lesson already learned. My name is Margaret Hale Bowen. Dr. Samuel Whitcomb at Mary Fletcher Hospital in Burlington told me in September of 1977 that the cancer in my pancreas had gone beyond surgery. He was kind enough not to speak of months until I asked him directly. I have always preferred an exact measurement. The work began with Nathaniel Hale, born in 1841 in Brattleboro, who learned reed cutting after the war and opened a bench of his own in 1872. His daughter Ruth Hale Bowen, born 1876, carried it through the first years of the new century. Ruth's daughter Clara Bowen Hale, born 1903 in Windham County, learned voicing before she learned bookkeeping. I, Margaret, born in 1927, became the 4th pair of hands. On October 14, 1978, I closed the trade. The last customer left at 4:20 in the afternoon. After that, these rooms were silent for more than 30 years. Silence is not the same as uselessness. My husband, Thomas Bowen, was killed in France in 1944 while serving with the United States Army. Our son was 8 months old. For several years afterward, women from this valley brought potatoes, split wood, lamp oil, and once an entire winter coat without leaving their names. Later, when I had more work than I needed, I began leaving money where widows would find it, without having to thank anyone. The diary records those amounts. Do not turn them into virtue. They were repayments. You will also find reeds I kept because their pitch remained honest. When voicing them, use steady air before touching the file. Brass must be room temperature, never cold enough to stiffen your fingers. Remove metal from the free end to raise pitch, nearer the fixed end to lower it, and test after every 3 or 4 strokes. For new Bellows leather, warm hide glue to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, never boiling. On the corner gussets, allow roughly 1 inch of overlap for every 4 inches of fold. Press them overnight and do not test full pressure for 24 hours. There is one more thing. Do not inherit this place merely because your name may match mine. Names are accidents unless someone gives them work to do. If you keep anything here, keep the discipline. Measure twice. Listen before filing. Repair what can still bear repair. When a thing has finished its useful life, let it finish honestly. The money beneath the bench came from 38 years of work, saving, and the sale of a small parcel near Guilford. Some of it was meant for retirement. Some was meant for people who needed it sooner. I stopped distributing it when my hands began to shake and I could no longer drive safely in winter. Use what is necessary to make the building sound. Do not make yourself poor to preserve old wood. Do not make yourself rich by selling every memory. Behind the studio, beyond the second walnut, there is a low granite marker beside the creek. Ruth set it there after her brother Benjamin died in 1918. The metal belongs with him. I could never bring myself to move it. If the reeds are still there, play one before you decide anything. A craft is not inherited because someone leaves you tools. It becomes yours when you accept the patience the tools demand. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Margaret Hale. Bowen, November 2nd, 1978. Penny read the letter twice. The second time, she moved more slowly over Walter's surname, over the line about measuring twice, over the instruction to test after 3 or 4 strokes. When she finished, she laid all 6 pages together and folded them along their original creases. The paper seemed to know where it wanted to bend. She placed it inside the diary. Then she went through the back door. The ground behind the studio was soft with thaw. Penny passed the first walnut, then the second, counting because the letter had told her to count. Near the creek, moss covered a low granite rectangle almost entirely. She knelt and cleared it with her bare hands. Benjamin Hale, 1896-1918, nothing more. Penny took the medal from her coat pocket. For a moment she held it above the stone, then closed her fingers around it again. The letter had said it belonged with him. It had not said to leave it in the weather. She returned to the workroom and opened the wrapped packet of reeds. From the first row she chose one stamped C. The brass was cool, but not cold. Penny fitted it into one of the old testing blocks, checked the tongue clearance with the thin gauge, then repaired enough of the hand bellows seam with a temporary strip of leather to make one brief test possible. She pumped carefully. Air passed through the frame. The reed spoke. The note began rough, steadied, and held. Penny did not touch the file. She listened until the reservoir sank and the sound disappeared. That afternoon, Amos Pike walked up the lane carrying a paper sack with 2 potatoes, a heel of bread, and a jar of beans. He set it inside the doorway. Credit does not include starving. 2 days later, Mr. Pease, the farmer who had given Penny a place in his hay barn, left a bundle of dry maple beside the gate. He had tied it with baling twine so neatly she could lift it in one arm. Mrs. Voss sent no package at all. She simply appeared before closing one Thursday with a photocopy of an old deed showing Nathaniel Hale's name in the property chain. "I thought you might want the part before you." Penny took the paper with both hands. There had been no grand rescue among any of them. A blanket, a ledger line, dry wood, a copied deed. Each kindness had been small enough for its giver to forget, and large enough for its receiver to remember. Before we go farther, think about one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to. Maybe it was a meal, a ride, a place to sleep, or simply someone believing you could repay them later. If you remember one, tell us about it in the comments. Sometimes the smallest help is the part that stays. That night, Penny wrapped Margaret's diary in the waxed cloth and placed it beside Walter's canvas roll. The reed block rested on the floor within reach. For the first time since arriving, she did not sleep in her coat. Snow came on December 2nd, 6 inches before noon, settling through the broken north roof onto the floor Penny had swept the previous evening. She carried the repair book beside the stove and read the roofing chapter 3 times. The first reading told her what the words meant. The second told her what could go wrong. On the third, she measured. The north slope was 38 feet long and 14 feet from ridge to eave. Allowing for waste and overlap, she calculated roughly 600 square feet of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of roofing felt, and nearly 12 pounds of galvanized nails. She wrote each number on the wall beside the ladder, then checked them again before walking to Amos Pike's store. Amos studied the list and disappeared into the back room. He returned with a roofing hatchet, whose handle had been darkened by decades of palms. "My brother's," he said. "He won't need it." Penny understood what he meant and did not ask more. The man who showed her how to use it was Elias Cobb, 71, a retired roofer with shoulders bent by 40 years of climbing ladders. He arrived the next morning carrying his own chalk box and refused the money Penny offered. "I already got paid for roofs." He sistered the first weakened rafter beside its sound neighbor, making Penny hold the new timber flush while he drove bolts through both. After that, he made her do the next one. They snapped a chalk line from ridge to eave. Penny began laying shingles. Her first nail sat too high. Elias tapped it with one finger. "That nail's proud," Set it lower. On the third course, Penny bent another. Pull it. We don't bury mistakes. He taught her the 3-stroke rhythm. 1 light strike to set the nail, 1 square stroke to drive it, 1 final controlled tap until the head lay just above the cedar without crushing the grain. They worked 11 days. Some mornings the shingles were rimed white until 10. Penny climbed down whenever wind made the ladder tremble. Elias never hurried her. By mid-December, the last ridge cap lay straight beneath a hard blue sky. That night, snow stayed outside. Penny placed a bowl beneath the place where water had dripped for years. In the morning, it was empty. January exposed what fire had hidden. Several bricks above the roofline were spalling, their faces flaking loose under Penny's thumb. Between them, old mortar had softened to pale powder. When she brushed the joints, whole seams fell out like flour. Elias would not let her use Portland cement, too hard for old brick. Amos sold her hydraulic lime, fire clay, and washed sand on credit. For the hottest interior joints, she mixed 1 part hydraulic lime to 1 part fire clay, adding water slowly until the mortar held on the trowel without slumping. Exterior joints received the softer lime mixture the old masonry could move against. For 3 weeks she worked whenever the weather allowed. Afternoon temperatures rarely climbed beyond the upper 20s Fahrenheit. Penny wore gloves while carrying brick, then removed them for the pointing work because she could not feel the joint through wool. Every 15 minutes her bare fingers went numb. She climbed down, held them near the stove until they hurt again, and returned to the scaffold. She cut damaged mortar back to sound material, misted each joint lightly, packed the new mix in narrow lifts, and protected the work overnight with burlap. By January 27th, when the crown was sealed, Penny waited for the final joints to firm, then built a test fire from dry maple. At first she kept it small. The flame took. Heat moved upward. She stepped outside and watched a clean column of smoke rise from the repaired chimney without spilling from a joint or curling beneath the cap. When she came back in, the room smelled only of wood smoke. The chimney drew clean. The floors required patience of another kind. Most boards were old white pine, wide and uneven, fixed with hand-cut rose-head nails whose dark heads remained visible beneath generations of dirt. Penny reset the loose ones instead of replacing them. She drove each nail only far enough to secure the plank, unwilling to erase the tool marks around it. Amos arranged a random orbit sander for $14 per day. Penny rented it once. She cleared the front room before dawn and began with 80 grit paper, moving with the boards instead of across them. The first pass removed gray surface dirt and old finish. The second, at 120 grit, softened the scratches. The final 220 grit pass took most of a day because she worked around every surviving rosehead nail by hand. Dust entered her sleeves, her hair, and the seams of Walter's tool roll, even though she had moved it upstairs. After vacuuming twice, Penny wiped the planks and laid down the first thin coat of oil. Then another. Then a third. She left 48 hours for the final cure and slept in the workroom while the front floor hardened. The boards did not become new. They changed from dull, dark honey toward mahogany wherever age had tightened the grain, with lighter streaks remaining beside the walls, where little sun had reached. One morning she did none of it. She had awakened with a headache, spilled half a bucket at the well, and snapped the handle from a borrowed scraper before breakfast. Rather than force another task, she walked down to the marsh. A great blue heron stood in the shallows. Penny sat on a fallen log and watched it for nearly 3 hours. The bird moved once every several minutes, lifting one foot, placing it down, waiting again. She returned to the studio before dusk. No work had been lost by leaving it alone. There were 8 windows altogether. 3 had no glass. 4 retained panes broken from corner to corner. The 8th held one wavering original pane recorded in the building papers as surviving from 1788. its surface full of slight distortions that bent the walnut branches when Penny looked through it. She did not remove that pane. She repaired around it. For the others, Amos found old glass close enough in thickness that the new repairs did not shine unnaturally beside the surviving work. Penny scraped each sash to sound wood, replaced missing points, and warmed DAP 33 glazing putty between her hands before rolling it into narrow ropes. She pressed the putty firmly into the rabbet, set the glass against it, fixed the pane with glazing points, then drew a putty knife along the outer bead in one continuous stroke whenever her hand was steady enough. The first corners were clumsy. By the fifth window they were clean. Several sash weights still worked, but the cords had rotted through. Penny threaded 1/4-inch cotton sash cord over each pulley, tied the counterweight with a figure-8 knot, and checked the travel before closing the access pocket. A properly balanced sash surprised her. It stayed wherever she left it, not held open with a stick, not dropping beneath its own weight, simply balanced. The 8th window took most of February 26th. Penny worked slowly around the old pane, preserving the existing glass and replacing only the failed putty along its lower edge. Late in the afternoon, she lifted the sash 6 inches to test the new cord. It moved without resistance. Outside, a chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch. The bird turned its black-capped head toward the open window while Penny held one hand on the sash rope. Neither moved for several seconds. Then the chickadee flew. Penny lowered the window until the meeting rails touched and turned the latch. The wall beside the chimney failed 3 times. The original plaster had been laid over hand-split oak lath, its brown coat strengthened with horsehair that still showed where chunks had fallen away. Penny's first patch dried too fast and cracked. The second pulled loose from dusty lath. The third held overnight, then dropped to the floor while she was carrying water. She swept it up without speaking. Amos found an old sack of horsehair in the loft above his store, left from repairs his father had made years earlier. Penny washed it, cut the longest strands, and mixed fresh lime plaster. This time, she dampened the lath first. The scratch coat was pushed between the oak strips until it mushroomed behind them, then scored while still green. Over that she laid a 3/8-inch brown coat and left it 72 hours before touching the wall again. The finished coat went on barely 1/8 inch thick. It was not perfectly flat, neither was anything around it. Penny stood beside the stove and ran her palm across the cured surface. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Vale owned the cafe near the center of town and wore her gray hair in a braid wound twice around the back of her head. She began leaving paper bags on Penny's doorstep every Tuesday. 2 biscuits, soup in a jar, sometimes an end piece of pie wrapped in waxed paper. Penny caught her once at the gate and tried to pay. Doris pushed the coins back into her hand. In candles, when the shop reopens. Then she walked away before Penny could explain that there was no shop yet. Caleb Morse arrived 3 Saturdays later on an old Schwinn bicycle, a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, tall enough that his wrists showed beyond his coat cuffs, and he looked at adults mostly through the hair falling across his forehead. He split the pile of maple Mr. Pease had left and stacked it bark side up beneath the lean-to. Penny offered him $4. He shook his head. My mother said, "About your grandfather." My grandfather? Caleb shrugged, embarrassed by the correction. Your family, then. He rode home before sunset. Reverend Boyd passed the studio most mornings on his walk from the Methodist parsonage toward town. He had a red wool scarf and a careful limp. He never came inside unless invited. Each morning he tipped his hat. One morning, while Penny stood on the step holding a bucket of plaster water, he paused. May the work endure. 4 words, then he continued down the road. Penny postponed the cellar until February 11th. The hatch beneath the rear stair opened onto 7 granite steps, descending into a room 12 feet by 15. Its floor was fieldstone packed close enough that only narrow seams of earth showed between the rocks. She carried the lamp down first. At the center of the floor lay one dressed granite slab, unlike the surrounding stones. A small mark had been carved near its edge, a free reed inside a simple Bellows outline. Penny brushed the dust from it. She did not lift it. The house had taught her that finding something did not require opening it immediately. While checking the steps for looseness, her fingers touched wood beneath the third tread. A small oak box had been wedged behind the riser. Inside lay a brass key and a tintype wrapped in linen. The key had an oval bow shaped like two bellows leaves closing around a reed tongue. The tintype showed a young woman standing outside the same studio in summer. She wore a white blouse with sleeves rolled above her wrists and held a voicing file against one palm. Penny lifted the photograph closer to the lamp. The resemblance was uncomfortable in its precision. The narrow chin, the distance between the eyes, even the way the woman's left shoulder sat slightly lower than the right. On the back, written in brown ink, were 7 words. Clara, daughter of Ruth, age 25, summer of 1903. Penny sat on the 4th granite step for a long time. Then she wrapped the photograph again. The key remained on the mantel upstairs. She tried it, in no luck. Not yet. By March, the snow retreated first from the south wall, then from the lane. The creek became loud enough to hear through closed windows. Walnut catkins appeared in April, thin and green against branches Penny had known only as black winter lines. She had expected spring to be the moment she began reed-making properly. Instead, she waited. There were too many things she could damage by believing inheritance meant readiness. She chose one worn silver coin from Margaret's cash and decided that its value, and no more, would pay for practice brass, goatskin scraps, fresh hide glue, and expendable samples. The finished reeds in the waxed packets remained untouched. Each morning, Penny practiced filing on pieces that could be ruined without consequence. Some were. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Penny finished her first complete reed set. She had begun it in October and discarded 5 reeds before allowing herself to call 12 of them usable. Each brass tongue had been cut oversize, fitted into its frame, set for clearance, then voiced under steady reservoir pressure. Penny filed in movements so small, the brass dust looked like pollen on black paper. The final C sat 3 cents sharp. She touched the file to the free end. 2 strokes. Test. 1 more. When she pumped the rebuilt bellows, the reed settled into pitch and stayed there through the falling pressure. Penny removed her hand from the lever. She did not smile immediately. She listened until the last vibration left the bench. Only then did she write the date beside the pitch in a small ledger. The studio around her had changed without becoming polished. The white pine floors still carried dark nail heads. Margaret's tuning table stood repaired at the center, its walnut casing rubbed with oil rather than refinished. The plaster followed the old walls instead of hiding their unevenness. 8 windows admitted winter light, including the wavering old pane that bent the second walnut tree into a slight curve. Walter's broken file hung above the bench. Margaret's letter stayed in its wax cloth beneath it. The brass key remained on the mantel until January. A storm brought down one dead limb from the larger walnut tree. Penny went outside with Caleb, now nearly 19, to cut it into stove lengths. Near the trunk, he noticed a small green rectangle under the bark. Metal. Penny knelt. A brass plate had been set into the tree decades earlier and nearly swallowed by growth. The bellows and reed mark was engraved at its center. She went inside for the key. It turned once. A narrow compartment opened behind the plate. Inside was a folded flag, wrapped in waxed canvas, its field bearing 48 stars. Beneath it lay one sheet of paper. The writing belonged to Clara, July 18th, 1944. My Thomas is somewhere in France, though no one will tell us where. Margaret keeps asking when he is coming home, and I have stopped answering with dates. This flag was given to us when Benjamin's name was read at the town hall after the last war. I cannot bear to keep it in the house while another man from this family is overseas, so I am leaving it with the tree. Trees know how to hold what people cannot. If Thomas returns, I will take it out. If he does not, let whoever finds it remember that waiting is work too. Clara Hale Penny read the note beneath the bare branches. Thomas had not returned. The tree had kept the flag for 80 years. She refolded it along the old lines and carried both flag and note indoors. The military medal from Margaret's hidden chamber went to Benjamin Hale's grave on November 11, 2024. Penny had located the family burial record at Meeting House Hill Cemetery and confirmed his service date before taking it there. She did not leave the medal exposed. A local veterans representative helped place it in a small weatherproof case fixed beside the marker. There was no ceremony. At 11 in the morning, Penny stood alone long enough to hear the church bell from town. Then she went home. Of Margaret's $36,700, Penny had used 4 coins. One bought the first practice brass. Another paid toward leather for the rebuilt feeder bellows. 2 more were exchanged when the well pump finally failed beyond repair. Everything else remained where Margaret had placed it. Penny repaired the false walnut panel, improved its seal, and returned the tin box to the chamber. She added a new envelope beside the old diary. On the front she wrote, "For the next one." People learned about the studio slowly. There was no opening day. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard, harmonium and pump organ. Read. Repair small jobs. Accepted ask for Penny at the old Reed studio. The first customer brought 3 reeds wrapped in a handkerchief. The second mailed a complete treble bank from Massachusetts. By summer, Penny kept a mailing list in a school notebook. 43 names filled the first pages. Churches, restorers, 2 collectors, a woman in Ohio with her grandmother's parlor organ, and 1 music teacher who needed only a broken bellows strap. Penny never advertised beyond the card. Doris never removed it. Caleb came back in October carrying a sign beneath one arm. He had learned basic carving from his vocational school instructor and spent 3 weekends working on a length of seasoned pine. The letters were uneven in places, but deeply cut. Hale and Bowen harmonium. Reed's and Daughters Penny stared at the last 2 words. Daughters? Caleb leaned the sign against the wall. Seemed unfinished without it. There were sons, too. I can carve smaller letters. She looked again. No. Caleb waited. Penny ran 1 thumb through the carved ampersand. Leave it. They hung the sign beneath the old one, not replacing what remained, but adding another board below it. That winter, Penny began a letter. She chose heavy paper, sharpened 1 pencil, then changed her mind, and used Margaret's steel nib pen after fitting it with a new point. For several minutes, she wrote nothing. Then, "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, I hope you already know that the building will ask more patience from you than money." She stopped. Outside, snow had begun along the lane. Penny looked toward the tuning table, where 1 finished reed set waited inside a felt-lined tray. She wrote about the roof, but only enough to explain where leaks usually began. She wrote down Amos Pike's credit ledger and added that debts of kindness could not always be settled with cash. She recorded the correct hide glue temperature, the Bellows leather overlap, and the name of the cemetery where Benjamin rested. Then she wrote something Margaret had never said and Walter had never needed to. A person could lose wages, a room, tools, trust, and the expectation that anyone would intervene. Still, work done carefully could become a kind of answer. Not an answer to everything, only the next thing. Penny folded the pages but did not seal them. There would be more to add. Near the end of February, she opened Margaret's diary again and read the donation entries properly. For the first time. $5 to Mrs. Lane after the mill accident. $12 beneath Mrs. Porter's flour tin. Coal ordered anonymously for the Avery household. No speeches, no signatures. Penny closed the diary and looked through the old pane toward the walnut tree. True harmony is created when we quietly support those who have lost their voice. She placed her unfinished letter beside Margaret's in the Bellows chamber. Then she closed the panel. Spring returned without announcement. Water moved under the remaining ice along the creek. A chickadee tested the repaired windowsill. On the bench, 3 reeds waited for voicing before breakfast. Penny lit the stove, warmed her hands, and opened the first repair envelope. The Harmonium Reed Studio waits. It has always waited. At the Windham County office, Mrs. Eleanor Voss retired the following year. On her final afternoon, she emptied the top drawer of her desk, finding old paper clips, 2 dried rubber bands, a brass stamp pad key, and 3 softened dollar bills folded together. She recognized them. Mrs. Voss put the other things into a cardboard box. The $3 stayed in the drawer.